A few weeks ago, we had Democratic Congresswoman Sharice Davids on our program, and today we have Republican U.S. Representative Ron Estes on this episode of Coffee with Chuck. Well, I am pleased to have joining us today our 4th District Congressman, a fifth generation Kansas Congressman Ron Estes, who is joining us, I think, from his district office today, possibly. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate the opportunity to chat this morning with you and hopefully a lot of your participants in the JAG program.
Well, you've been a long supporter of JAG-K, and we've certainly appreciated that. I know you visited some of our classrooms. You actually visited with some of our students in Washington, D.C. In December. And I guess today, since we have a little bit more time with you, I'd love to hear your story about how you started, what career path you chose initially, and then ultimately, how did you get into the United States Congress? And then we'd love to hear a little bit more about your job. So how did this all start?
Yeah, well, we only have 30 minutes, so I'll have to figure out how to do the condensed version of my life story. But, most of my career, I worked in the private sector. After I graduated from high school, I went to college, and actually I really didn't have a plan for my career goals coming out of high school. And I had good grades in high school. So, kind of the thought process at that point in time was people with good grades tend to go to an engineering program. And so that's what I did. I actually became a civil engineer. I went through the program to do that. And then when I got into the private sector, I didn't really do a lot of engineering work, but worked more with manufacturing companies and distribution companies, looking at how do we put in good computer systems to help improve their processes, but also looking at other ways to help improve the operations, and with a focus on, what is it that the customer wants, and how do we make the operation as efficient, as effective as possible. So I got my civil engineering degree and then worked for about 2.5 years, and then went back and got a master's in business administration. And that provided me a great foundation to be able to work in the private sector and get that engagement with learning for myself, from a personal standpoint, as well as being able to deal with other people and address some of those issues that you run into while you're out in the workforce and in life. A lot of those things that you learn from. My wife and I, we met at a Young Republican National Convention. So both of us have been involved in politics, helping other people get elected, and being involved in the Republican Party at the grassroots level, as a precinct committee man, committee woman, but also involved in the county and state parties. And when I was in the middle of my career, I kind of thought, if I'm going to be more engaged in this process, I ought to run for office myself. And first I ran for Sedgwick County Treasurer here. And part of the looking at that role was, it was more administrative role. It kind of fit a lot of what I had done in my career in the private sector, is looking at how do we improve the processes and how do we make that office more efficient. And then about 6 years into that office, I had the opportunity to run for Kansas State Treasurer and served there as Kansas State Treasurer. And again, it was an administrative role, so it allowed me to use the skills that I'd learned in the private sector and focus on a particular task and how do we make the office more efficient. One of the things I noticed when I was state treasurer was that the first couple of years I was in office, a lot of what we did, we have a national association of state treasurers, and there's actually 2 or 3 different organizations out there that work together. And one of the things, our first couple of years, we were spending a lot of time talking about best practices across different states, Republicans and Democrats in different states. And, all the state treasurers' offices aren't exactly alike, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of the roles and responsibilities that they have. And so that was really the first couple of years there. But the last 4 or 5 years that I was in office, a lot of what we were doing was trying to fend off bad legislation or bad policy or bad regulation coming out of Washington, D.C. And so when Mike Pompeo, who was my congressman at that point in time, when he was tapped by President Trump to be the CIA director, it created an opening in the congressional office. And so my look at that was that we ought to go, I ought to go run for office and focus on here's where the problems are coming from, and work through that and run for Congress and help focus on how can we make things more efficient and effective in terms of how policies get rolled forward across the country to affect not just state treasurers, but a lot of other people across the country. And so that's what led to me running for Congress. And that was 5 years ago. So I, on April 25th of this year, it will be my 5th year anniversary of being sworn in to Congress. So it's been a very interesting experience to be involved in that.
I'm sure. And it was an interesting way in how you entered Congress with that special situation with Congressman Pompeo. And then obviously you've been reelected multiple times since then. And I'd like to talk about the electoral process at some point, but I'm curious. I know you've lived in Wichita for a long time. Where's your family from originally? Is it the Sedgwick County area or some other part of Kansas?
Yeah, I was born in Topeka, and
Okay.
my mom still lives on a farm about 35 miles south of Topeka, just outside of Osage City. And
Okay.
so I went to kindergarten in Topeka, and then went to elementary school in Osage City. My dad worked for Goodyear in Topeka, and he was part of a startup team that went to open up a new Goodyear plant in Tennessee. So I actually went to Tennessee and went to high school in Tennessee and went to college at Tennessee Tech in Tennessee. And when I graduated from college, I kind of joke that a lot of people when they graduate from college they move away from home. Well, when I graduated from college, my parents retired and moved back to Kansas, and I stayed in Tennessee for a while. I lived in Nashville for 8 or 9 years, and it was a great experience. I mean, it's a wonderful city. I really like Nashville as a city, and it's grown a lot over the last 20 years as well. And then when our son was born, my wife and I decided we'd move back closer to family, and so we ended up moving, and we had an opportunity to move to Wichita and be here, and so it's worked out well for the last almost 25 years now.
When you were first running for office, the treasurer's position at the county level is a lot different than United States Congress. So certainly there are differences, but what are some of the similarities in running for an office? What are the important things you need to do to be effective and win a campaign?
Yeah. So, there, as you said, there are some differences in different offices. I mean, whether you're running for city council or county commission or state legislature or federal Congress. And as county treasurer, slightly different even than state treasurer. But part of what you do when you look at running for office is you look at what the roles and responsibility of that office is, and what you'd look to do in that office. And then you have to mix your skill set, your experiences, the things that you've done in your life, and the things you want to do in that office, and say this is the role that I want to fill in that office. And going through an elective process for any office then is you say, here's what I want to do. You go out and you communicate that to the voters in that district, whether it's a congressional district or county or even statewide, and you talk about this is who you are, this is what your background is, and you mentioned in my introduction that fifth generation Kansan. So we still have some land that has been in the family for 130 years now, that some of the farmland. And so you kind of talk about those grassroots things that you've learned over the years and that are important, as well as what you want to do in the office. And you build coalitions, you're really selling yourself. I mean, you're marketing yourself. And in that respect, running for office is a lot similar to anything else. If you're applying for admission to college, you write the essays and you kind of talk through, this is the life experiences you have. If you're applying for a job, if you're out talking to a group and you want to run to be, class president or, secretary or treasurer of an organization, it's kind of, you sell yourself. You've got to talk through about what your skills and abilities are, what your thought process is, and really it's kind of it is a sales pitch for yourself and marketing of yourself. But you're the best person to be able to talk about who you are and what you can do, and help explain that to others, and show what you would stand for and what you do and what you'd work to accomplish. And that's the same thing within running for an office at an elected level.
One of the reasons I wanted to ask that question is our career association elections are coming up. And so many students across the state in JAG-K will be running for career association president, vice president, treasurer. And so these are good tips for them when they're campaigning for their positions. I know many of our students would want to know, and I think you touched on this, about why you wanted to run for office, but are there some goals you have, specific goals that you would like to accomplish? You mentioned generally just, some good policy and procedure, but are there some specific things you would like to see accomplished by the time you retire, whenever that may be?
Yeah. Any office you run for, you want to talk about what you want to accomplish as the person that's elected for that office. Whether it's president of association or treasurer of association. As county treasurer, part of what we talked about, county treasurers deal with tagging your automobiles, and that process is notoriously slow and problematic. And so one of the things I focused on was how to bring my skill set from the private sector of focusing on what does a customer want, and what's the end user want, and how do we streamline the process to help with that. Same thing at the state treasurer level is looking at, how do we go through the process of promoting saving for college and returning unclaimed property back to Kansans who may have had a bank account that's that they'd lost touch with, or grandparents had died and they had some money somewhere, and so those were the focus there when you talk about that. At the federal level, as a member of the House of Representatives, there's a lot of things that we have to go through every year, and we touch on a broad subject of things that we go through. Obviously, we have different committees that have different focus on different areas, whether it's foreign affairs or defense or the appropriations committee. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, which is actually, it's probably the oldest committee in the House of Representatives. It's actually noted in the Constitution that Congress has a responsibility to determine how do we fund the government, how do we make the operations of the government. So we look at in our committee, what are the tax policies for the country? We also have responsibility for trade, because a lot of trade, particularly dating back to the founding of our country, that was really where a lot of the funding of the government came from, was tariffs on different trade products. And so obviously, when you have an economy like we do that's free market driven and capitalist society, you want to make sure that trade's available and you streamline that as much as possible. So those are types of things that we look at from the committee standpoint. Our committee also has responsibility for a lot of issues dealing with health particularly all the issues dealing with Medicare, primarily because Medicare is funded through our taxes. So it connects back to the tax aspect of the committee. And then several other programs as well that are connected back to our tax program. Probably the biggest one that's I haven't mentioned yet, Social Security, because the payroll taxes actually fund the funding that goes into Social Security. So, when I look at that from our committee standpoint, there's probably 2 or 3 things that I would say are the highest priorities as we move forward. One is just our national debt. I mean, we've got the situation set up now where our government programs are spending more money than we're taking in as revenue. And it's been built up over time. It's like borrowing a lot of money on a credit card. You can do that for a long period of time until people aren't willing to lend to you anymore because you've got so much debt. And we've really built up to where the United States is starting to get to the tipping point of having so much money borrowed that it's starting to affect how we can spend on programs that we need. So we've got to rein that back in. I mean, we can't continue to spend as much money on today's programs expecting our kids and grandkids and probably great grandkids to pay off that debt for today's programs that we have going on. The other thing,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say a second area of responsibility is just the world's a dangerous place. I mean, as we've seen over the last few days and weeks, the saber rattling that's coming out of Russia and their threat to invade Ukraine, and China's probably a bigger concern on an ongoing basis that we also have to address, because we've one of the thought processes 30 years ago was that the Chinese Communist Party, if they were allowed to participate in our trade organizations around the world, that it would free up more democracy and freedom for the citizens of their country. And in fact, it's gone just the opposite way. The Chinese Communist Party has actually taken advantage of the trade opportunities and continue to do the repression in their country. And so that's an issue that we've got to go back and revisit and probably need to change some of the approaches that we're taking through that aspect and focus on that. And then another area, you talk about how dangerous the world is and how the concerns we have and the responsibility from a federal government is just looking at security of the country. Particularly, we're seeing a lot of crime increases across the country over the last couple of years. A lot of that's been driven off of some poor policy discussions. I mean, defunding the police means you don't have police and law enforcement there to help, but also border security is a huge issue there. We can't go through this process of allowing people that we don't know whether they're coming here because they're looking for a job, or whether they're coming here because they're wanting to smuggle drugs into the country, or because they're involved in gangs on the Mexican side of cartels, as well as gangs in the United States. And so we've got to address that. Those are big federal issues that need to be looked at and managed.
Well, certainly a lot of challenges. What are some of the rewards of your job?
Part of the great thing is being able to get exposed to so many different issues and ideas that are out there. I have a lot of interest in a lot of different things. It's kind of interesting to learn about new things and different things. So obviously, on any given day, the issues that I run into may vary from one meeting talking about healthcare, and the next meeting talking about what's going on in the agriculture space, and the next meeting talking about taxes, and the next meeting talking about some questions on schooling and education, and how do we help folks get jobs as part of a career and education process. And so it's great to be able to get exposed to different ideas and different policy programs that get brought up. The other thing is just being able to meet and run into so many great people. I mean, when you look at the number of Kansans that, I've had the opportunity to go talk to, and going to high schools, going to businesses, going to hospitals, and talking about the issues and the things that are working and the things that maybe you need help on in some respect, or maybe the rules and regulations and statutes, the laws, the legislation that comes out of Washington or the state isn't meeting the needs of what needs to be done, and in some cases causing problems. So it's great to be able to be exposed to different people across the state and across the country in those scenarios.
What's one of the coolest things you've done as congressman?
One of the coolest things that I probably will always talk about is every 2 years, new members of Congress have the opportunity. They're invited to go on a trip to Israel, and basically the American Israeli Education Foundation puts that on. Other foundations do as well, but one that really stands out in my mind is a trip that we took to Israel, and I was able to have my wife go with me. My wife Susan, who's actually a Kansas State rep, by the way, but she went on the trip with me as well, and to be in the Middle East. We spent time in Israel. We spent some time on the West Bank, meeting with some of the Palestinian Authority folks as well. But being able to see thousands of years of history in this part of the world, and kind of understand a little bit of the dynamic of some of the ebbs and flows over a few centuries time, when different parts of the world, whether it's Romans, whether it's Greeks, whether it's Egyptians, whether it's the Ottomans and the Genghis Khan and that had control of this part of the world, seeing the different religions of the world that come together in that part of the world, and how they interact, and then also bringing that forward today and seeing the geopolitical aspects of we talk about the Golan Heights as a concern in terms of conflicts there, and just seeing how those mountains and then the farmland just right directly below them, and can understand that impact when there are conflicts and hostilities that haven't been resolved through the process. But it was just a great educational experience, and an opportunity to see a part of the world that I hadn't had the opportunity to see before.
Great. We mentioned that you're joining us from your district office in Wichita. I know we think of you working out of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and your legislative staff is there. Can you tell us just a little bit about the schedule for a congressman, and why you're in Wichita this week, and just maybe a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have an office in Washington, as well as an office in the district, and depends on your district makeup. Some members have more than one office in their district. Depends on the geographic layout. Some of the districts that have a larger geographic footprint. We typically are scheduled to be in Washington, D.C. for roughly 3 weeks a month, except for August. Traditionally, we don't have legislative activities scheduled in DC in August, and then the other week of the month, it's an opportunity to be in the district or to travel around the country, do site visits for different issues. Whether it's going to visit, several years ago I had the opportunity to go to the port of Long Beach in LA, and understand some of the issues that are going on there, and now can, because of being able to see and be exposed to that. My district office focuses primarily on constituent services. So if somebody has an issue that hasn't been resolved with the IRS or the Veterans Administration or Social Security or passport issue, those are typically start with our district office, and we have folks that have liaisons with some of the different federal agencies that help work through that. In Washington, we focus mostly on legislation and some of the regulatory items that are coming through out of Washington. So staff there is really focused more on the bills that come up and some of the issues that we may have to deal with from that standpoint. So able to have the staff in the two different offices work together, because sometimes they overlap in terms of what's going on there and how we need to solve a particular problem or what we need to do going forward through that.
In our last couple of minutes, and we appreciate your time this morning, what advice would you give our students who either may want to pursue a career in public service or just generally? What advice would you give them to have a successful career?
Yeah, I'll break it down into probably a couple things. One, just from a standard career that anybody can do and should do is look for opportunities, things that you're interested in, whether it's a particular area of work, whether it's a role or a project within the job that you have, or even going outside where you end up working and getting involved with an organization or association to help out with those issues. And there's so many organizations out there that would look for volunteers, look for people to participate, be members of, ranging from charitable organizations to political organizations to just like-minded folks that want to do exchange ideas through that process. So take advantage of things that you're interested in and being engaged. Continue to look for opportunities to learn more around that. I think it was very beneficial for me to work in the private sector before I ran for public office, because the meeting the needs of a customer are so important in terms of being able to say, okay, the role of government is to provide these services. And I'm a big believer that there is a place for government, but it should be limited through that process. But we ought to do it well. I mean, and we shouldn't necessarily view our success as whether we have a bigger budget year over year, but how well we're helping out the constituents, how well we're solving the issues that are out there. If people have an interest in running for office, one of the things to do is get involved with a campaign or get involved with a local political party. There are all sorts of folks that run for office that would love to have volunteers on their campaign, whether you're running for city council or county commission or the school board or state legislature or a governor of the state or statewide offices, or Congress. I mean, all of those campaigns look for people to participate and help out, and sometimes it's just maybe you're answering the phones, asking questions. Maybe you're out putting up yard signs for the candidate. But a couple things. One, you see the process and you get engaged there. But also you meet new people and you have an opportunity to expand your universe of folks that and can be engaged in. And it's always good to get new experiences and to grow with those new experiences.
Well, 4th District Congressman Ron Estes, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your support of JAG-K.
Well, great, Chuck. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and this has been good. And it's great to be able to talk about how do we take individuals going through school and getting their life started and getting on a good footing to move forward.